where human beings went wrong is when they decided to separate values from the universe. When we decided to take values and say this is a completely separate thing. So this vase has no rules attached to it anymore. It's just a vase. And we can construct the rules arbitrarily as to what to do with this vase. And so eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil changes the nature of good and evil from the universe comes along with a set of rules to human beings think that they can use their own intuition to supplant God's rules and to supplant universal rules with their own particular vision of what the universe ought to be. And at that point, they have to be expelled.
Yeah, well, okay. So that's also associated to some degree, I would say, with Milton's warning in Paradise Lost. Because Milton basically portrays Lucifer, who's the bringer of light, weirdly enough, as the spirit of unbridled rationality, which accounts for, say, the Catholic Church's antagonism towards rationality. The idea was, same idea in the Tower of Babel, that human beings have a proclivity to erect their own dogmatic ethical systems and then to expand them into a grandiosity that challenges the transcendent, and that's a totalitarian catastrophe. And for Milton, Satan was the spirit that eternally does that, right? Who says, everything I know is enough, and that supplants what I don't know. That supplants the transcendent, and that's a catastrophe. How that's tangled up with the knowledge of good and evil, well, you're making some headway towards sorting that out. I mean, there is a cataclysm that's explained in the story of Adam and Eve, right? The cataclysm is the coming to wakefulness. And it's associated partly with recognition of nakedness, which is recognition of vulnerability and mortality and the discovery of death, and then also the discovery of good and evil that goes along with that. So you said, well, that's partly the cognitive division of ethics from the facts of the object. So I have to think that through. I would also recommend to people, I think I mentioned this before, is Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, because he looks at this neuropsychologically, right? And looks at the left hemisphere as the hemisphere that's dealing with the explicitly axiomatic systems, and the right hemisphere that's dealing with what those systems are embodied in. Okay, so part of what happens with the emergence of good and evil, as far as I could tell, it took me a long time to think about this, is that, and this is different than the hypothesis that you laid forward, which is why I can't reconcile them exactly, is you recognize you're naked. You know you can be hurt. You know you're vulnerable and insufficient. You hide from God, because that's what happens next. And the reason you hide from God, say God is your destiny, or God is you're walking with God is a manifestation of your ultimate proper destiny. You doubt whether you're capable of that because now you realize your embodied finitude, your nakedness and insufficiency. So you hide and you're ashamed. So there's that. You also realize that you can be hurt and suffer. And that kind of goes along with God's command that you're going to work in the sweat of your brow and that you're going to die, and that women are going to be subjugated to men, which is put on as a curse, not as a moral imperative, right? But then what emerges out of that is that as soon as you know that you can be hurt, this is what differentiates us from animals, and you really think that through, here's all the myriad ways I can be hurt, then you're angry about that because you can be hurt. But even worse, you can figure out how to hurt other people. And so that's part of that knowledge of good and evil. You associated it with this dissociation of the object from its ethical container.
Of the universe as created by God from our interpretation of the universe. That there is a gap between the two. And that once human beings begin to supplant their own rationality for a telos, right, in the Aristotelian, the teleology, what we end up doing is creating all sorts of awful systems that end up destroying us in the end.
There's something about that that's right. I mean, part of what happens in the New Testament, as far as I can tell, is that what Christ says, so he's trying to transcend the rule structure, right? Not because there's anything wrong with the rules. They're a necessary precondition for discipline, which is actually why I wrote 12 rules, right? It's like, you need rules, but rules conflict, and they don't always apply. And so there has to be an ethic underlying the rules, and you should have more respect for the ethic than for the rules.
Right.
Okay, Christ's idea, and this is part of the idea of the reestablishment of paradise, is that you should orient yourself towards the good. And that's something like an alliance with God. And then that you should tell the truth. And that's the ethic that generated the rules to begin with.